Alright, so this is our third video in this background guides training series, I suppose. And this is covering the required sections. I'm covering this in video format because as I was going through our policies as adopted, there was a lack. It wasn't defined what the required sections were, just that they must be followed. And so the first required section is the introduction. And this introduction sort of serves as an introduction to not necessarily like the conflict or like the real topic, but like any prerequisite knowledge, like any concepts that you need to know before you get into it, like defining some terms, like just making sure that the delegates have they know what they need in order to get into the committee and get into the topic. It's also important to recommend any past action, or not recommend, to show any past action that the UN has taken. This is important so then they can sort of, delegates can like put the topic in context. And then the topic summary really helps with this because it's essentially like the first paragraph of this introduction section. And so, yeah, I mean, that's all I really have to say about the introduction. You'll also want to include a section called blocks, and this is where you sort of outline what blocks might form. So you name the positions that groups of countries might take. And what's important is that you don't like directly name a country. So, because that could limit a country, perhaps, a delegate actually finds that they agree more with this and this. And I know that, delegates are acting in the interest of their country, but different people will interpret that in different ways. So it's important to just name the positions that different blocks might take, but not necessarily be like, this, if you're in this country, you have to be in this block. So don't name countries when you outline the blocks, just focus on their viewpoint. And what's really important is that you present all of them equally so that one block doesn't just have like an advantage. Like your background guide cannot like support or endorse one specific ideology or viewpoint on the issue. That's really important. And then you want to motivate the reasons, like why, like that sort of goes into explaining it equally, is like each viewpoint has equal claim to being the correct viewpoint. In international issues, the correct option is often very contentious, and that's why it is an international issue. Countries are struggling to decide what is the action that we're going to take, and so you need to present each ideology, each viewpoint on the topic in an impartial manner. You're going to want to include a section on solutions. In this, I'm focusing on GA because that's what I know. But these solutions typically are just what the committee might do, not what they have to do. That's important, is that you don't want to force some ideal solution upon the delegates. They'll have to make that decision for themselves. And so a few different things that you might suggest is perhaps a regulation or creation of a new body. You see those very often. But then also at the same time, maybe you have to get rid of somebody. Maybe you have to make some resolution to stop talking about the matter. And that really goes in hand with the null resolution. What I mean by that is that's the committee saying we are not going to make any action on it. And that can happen if the blocks just simply cannot agree on one resolution, and either nothing passes or maybe some resolution that's been picked apart and amended by so many countries that it effectively does nothing. And that's fine. That's sometimes what happens in the UN. And as we are a simulation of the UN, it's important that we don't reject that resolution, a resolution that does nothing, as some false, because that is what the UN does. It would not be like your committee would have failed if they decided that they were going to make no action. And then I quoted this section. If you're doing a topic that might be like contentious for the UN, or not contentious, but like a topic that perhaps that committee had never heard before, or like had never had jurisdiction on, it's important. Your delegates might want to include a clause at the end that says decides to remain actively seized to the matter. That's basically the committee saying that we're going to keep looking in this topic. We're going to keep doing work. We're going to keep looking at how it's going, and we're going to keep suggesting more action on it. And that's important in some committees, perhaps if it's an issue that's sort of new, or if it's an issue that this committee had never really heard before. But if you need to inform the delegates, you need to make them know that if their country thinks, if their delegation thinks that this is a topic that should continue to be heard in this committee, in their resolution they might consider adding a line that says decides to remain actively seized of the matter. And then at the end, you're also going to want the role list. Role just is like country, or in crisis, like a person. And so our role assignment process requires two different lists. Basically, the way it works is we have a list of countries that are all indexed with some number, some arbitrary random number. And then when somebody registers, we pick a random number from within that range. And whatever random number they get is the country that they are assigned, or the role that they are assigned. And so we need two lists because we want to make sure that all the important countries are assigned, and then the less important countries are assigned. This sort of encourages early registration, which is what we want. We want to know our numbers beforehand, and make sure that the committee is going to be full of people that know the topic, or not people that know the topic, countries that are relevant to the topic. And so our core list we call the two lists the core list and the extended list. So the core list is going to be countries that are chosen from first. So when we're making those random number generations, we're picking from the core list before we dip into the extended list. And we only go into the extended list once the core list has been fully assigned. And so we didn't set a hard limit for the size of the core list because different topics might vary. Perhaps this topic is really broad and every country, has a big say in it. Or maybe the topic is really small and only a few big countries have a say in it. So that's why we have a range. So your core list should consist of 8 to 12 countries. More or less we can handle on a case-by-case basis, but and make sure you pick those from the most important countries to the topic. And then the extended list, once the core list has been chosen, then we start choosing the extended list. And it should be around 10 to 15 countries in size, again depending on the size of that core list and stuff. The list must sum to 20. So notice that if I choose the lower end of both, so if I have 8 and 10, then I'll only get 18, so that's not enough. So I'll need to add 2 more countries to the extended list. That's because we anticipate 20 delegates per committee, and so we want to make sure that we don't have to dip into, because what happens is once we assign everything those lists, wow, that's amazing, we're registering so many delegates, but then we start dipping into the national or the international, the UN list of registered countries, and we just go and we randomize a number and we pick one. And so we don't want to do that because we think that the chairs have the best judgment in what countries are relevant to the topic. And so we recommend if you can find countries, try to come up with a number on the upper end. And like I said, let me see. So then beyond the required sections, so basically those are the required sections. But if you think that just doing the required sections would pass the quality control, you would be mistaken. You need to cover the topic in the depth necessary. Again, we're reaching for that 10 to 11 pages of content. You really need to explain the topic, and just an introduction, a country list is really not going to cut it. You'll need to no blanket list would really encompass all the topics, because one topic, one committee might need a bunch of sections to explain this specific part of their topic, and maybe another doesn't need that, and so we can't necessarily force that. So we give freedom to the chairs to sort of decide what is important to their committee. What did they need in order to appropriately cover the topic in enough depth for countries to make make good decisions, make good policy, and that sort of thing. Um, yeah, and like I said, so if we grade and while format, you must include the required sections in order for your background guide to pass. Um, and that's encompassed sort of in the format score, but then that's only one part of the score. So it's very important, and I think that this is very, very, very important. You really need to come up with the way that you are going to structure your background guide, um, like as in how you are going to be teaching the topic. Because remember, you are as chair, you are essentially like a teacher to a delegate. Like you are writing some paper that they will read, and so it has to have a somewhat logical flow, a somewhat pedagogical flow to really explain the topic. And the required sections doesn't really do that. In fact, the country list, we're not sure yet if that'll be kept internally or if that will be posted on the background guide. So you might even so the required sections might not even all the required sections might be posted, is what I'm trying to say. And so yeah, that's what I have to say about our required sections. Thank you, and can't wait to see the background guides.